Hello all, can you all hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you all. There was a funny thing that happened with my PowerPoint presentation that I've never seen before, whereby the letter A occurs after each word. So I'm just going to take that as my grade for the day, and everybody gets an A. So as Andrea mentioned, I worked with the homeless prenatal program in San Francisco, where I was an MSW intern for 2014 to 2015. And so I wanted to begin by kind of framing the fact that birth and all of the things that kind of go along with birth can be this universal experience, just demonstrated by the fact that everyone here has a birth story. And in this work, I was a doula back in Philadelphia, where I lived for 10 years before coming here for graduate school. When I would tell people about that line of work, they would often be, strangers, seemingly very conservative men in suits on the bus would tell me their birth story or their birth story of someone close to them. And so it has this universality to it. And yet we know that by the way these birth stories are handed down to us through generations, and all of the health disparities that are related to birth and infant health outcomes in the US and around the world, that birth is something that is very particular, very influenced by a variety of factors, be that cultural, sociological, political, economic, and familial. And so my work with Homeless Prenatal Program on their doula program really helped me to understand the intersection of all of these factors and how doulas can intervene. So this is the time in the presentation where I have to ask, does everyone know what a doula is? It's okay if you don't, I won't make anyone raise their hands, but a doula, as it's currently sort of framed and practiced in the US and around the world, is a non-medical support person for across a range of reproductive health events, be that abortion. Some doulas work with folks who are getting a pelvic exam or an intrauterine device, a birth control insertion. And then, of course, there are birth doulas. So this non-medical provider is there to be really holding space and bearing witness, which I think is something we have been acknowledging implicitly as part of human rights work, and to provide a range of physical comfort measures, informational support, psychosocial, emotional care. And so HPP, the organization that I worked with, has a comprehensive set of social services that they provide, and a lot of demonstrated great health outcomes for the folks that they work with in San Francisco. And that's primarily the neighborhoods of the Mission, Bayview, and Hunters Point in San Francisco. These are predominantly low-income neighborhoods, a lot of gentrification going on, of course, in these neighborhoods, displacement, and they're primarily black and brown folks, so it's African American and Latino families. And so what I noticed at HPP when I was a social work intern there, as a former doula, I was really excited that they had a doula program, but the fact that they had a doula program didn't mean that it was working really well. I love that HPP had this sense of basic services, including things like acupuncture, prenatal massage, hypnobirthing, and childcare for every client who came in for their appointment. And doula care wasn't included in this set of basic services, but referrals often wouldn't connect, or the case managers and social workers wouldn't know what a doula really was, or they would say, "Is that a midwife?" And I would have to say, "No." And then they would often really want to refer to a doula, but because the doula cohort was all volunteer, the doula cohort didn't really interact with the providers at HPP. So there was a sense of distance and not collaboration. And then another thing that happened was that I had a particular client who really opened me up to this, that for her, the fact that she had a great experience with her doula, actually. And even though, and this happened because it was an all-volunteer program, she actually had to have two doulas. One of the doulas that was with her for her birth, she had a 3-day birth. And that doula actually had to leave about halfway through, and another doula, whom she didn't know, was called in. So thankfully there was another volunteer to do that backup. But she asked me if she could pay the doulas that were just maybe like $10. She was really disturbed by the fact that they weren't paid at all. And she had the question of, can I be a doula? It was so moving to me to have this support, and I would really love to be able to give back to my community in this way. But the way that Homeless Prenatals doula program was set up at the time, that wasn't an option for her. Former clients didn't have access to become trained as doulas at Homeless Prenatal. So in the range of activities in which I engaged in my summer fellowship with HPP, those included interviews with 4 key constituencies. That was current social workers and case managers, the people making the referrals to this nebulous doula program, the current volunteer doulas, clients who'd received doula care and those who hadn't, and the management tier at HPP. We came up with these 5 core elements, and we're really inspired by a group out of Chicago called Health Connect One that actually pays their doulas. And as I was doing research on doula care models in the U.S., in cities like similar to Homeless Prenatal, I found that it was a really rare thing for doulas to be paid. So as you'll see here, and again, I guess A is the grade that all of these core elements get, but to employ trusted members of the community, to extend the role of the doula and the role of doula training. So currently, the volunteer doulas at HPP get a 2-day training, and the model we're moving forward with will have a 6-month training, and there'll be 20 sessions. Also, in that training, we're really focusing more on popular education techniques versus the didactic, like take notes at a PowerPoint presentation. Like I'm not doing a popular education modeling right now. Collaboration with stakeholders within and without the organization's formal boundaries. So there are a lot of people who have been practicing as a doula, even if they didn't call it that, doula care, that kind of just attending and bearing witness to a person's birth is an ancient practice, really. So engaging with people in the community who are birth workers in a range of identities has been an important part of this. And valuing the doula's work through salary, supervision, and support. So that is really the biggest change and represents the biggest obstacle, but also I feel like the biggest opportunity, because this work is so kind of demonstrated to be instrumental and incredibly important when it comes to improving birth outcomes and the experience of a range of reproductive health events. And just to wrap up with the framing of doula care as a human rights issue, that reproductive justice provides a political home for a set of ideas, aspirations, and visions in language that encompass all human rights issues. So this is a quote from Loretta Ross, who's part of incredibly important contingent women of color birth workers from the US who went to a human rights conference in Cairo in 1994. And they really used the human rights framework to bring back to the US and try to talk about the negative health outcomes. And really, what I really appreciate about Loretta Ross and this quote and these women who started moving forward with the reproductive justice framework is that they distinguish justice from rights. And they talk about justice is not the absence of violence or burden, but rather the presence of the freedom to make love, sex, family, and community. And I wanted to dedicate this presentation to Nancy Frappier, who was my MSW supervisor, and she passed away this summer during the beginning of the fellowship, and I know she'll be really happy to see you all here, and really happy to see all the great work you're doing. Thank you so much.